All right, welcome back to the conversation. I am privileged to be joined today by Howie Hawkins, who was the Green Party's 2020 presidential nominee, a retired Teamster. Howie, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So we're here to talk about HR1 and S1, the For the People Act. And there's been a lot of talk online about some of the problems with tucked inside the bill as they relate to third-party candidates. I thought, who better to have on than an actual third-party candidate himself? But first, aside from your role as a third-party member, what is your kind of top-line take on this bill, HR1? And then I want to get into some of the individual objections.
Well, the top line is the voting rights provisions, the anti-partisan gerrymandering positions. There are a lot of things in this bill that will preempt what the Republicans are doing all across the country in terms of voter suppression and limiting who can vote and how districts are drawn. So they're trying to enhance their power by drawing district lines that bias toward them and suppressing voters that probably won't vote for them. So that's really important, and those things ought to pass. That's the top line. Now, for the Greens and the third parties, the campaign or the matching funds program in there basically excludes us and adds money to what the major party candidates can raise, but doesn't limit the private money they can raise. So it's not a good look from our point of view.
Yeah, and there's kind of two different public matching fund provisions here. So let's take them one at a time. Let's just start on the presidential level. So under current law, and you would know the details of this better having lived through it, but there's a certain amount of matching funds a candidate can get for a primary. There's a certain amount that can be obtained in a general. In order to get it, correct me if I'm wrong, you need 5,000 signatures in 20 states, in the minimum of 20 states around the country to kind of demonstrate that you're a viable national candidate. Now, none of the major party candidates have taken the matching funds, I believe, since 2008, because you're capped on how much you can spend if you take the matching funds, and the cap is something so small, somewhere between $50 and $100 million, that major party big money candidates that are spending $1 billion to run for president, won't handcuff themselves with that anymore. So they've kind of left it behind. And so, did you take matching funds in 2020, and how difficult was it to get them?
Yeah, you said signatures. I think you meant dollars.
Oh, yes. Right.
$5,000 in 20 states.
It's the signatures for the ballot, but in order to get the matching funds, you have to raise money.
Yeah, we need a lot more than 5,000 signatures in most states. That's a whole nother question.
Right.
Which HR1 doesn't address, fair ballot access. The system now, which comes out of the 1974 Federal Election Campaign Act, says $5,000 at least in 20 states. Those donations have to be $250 or less. The proposal now is to raise that to $25,000 in 20 states. So it's 5 times larger. My campaign, we are still documenting we got the donations, so we haven't actually got the matching funds yet. But the Green Party in the last decade is the only party really using it.
Right.
Libertarians used it in 2012, and Johnson was so upset with how difficult it was dealing with the FEC. He didn't even try in 2016. And you're right, the major party candidates, if you accepted the money in 2020, you couldn't spend more than $52 million on your primary campaign, which for the major party candidates was not enough.
Right, they're spending that in an individual state.
The big candidates. Right. So, another fix to that is raise the cap. And what they're doing in this HR1 is just eliminating the cap. So you can raise as much private money as you want and also get some public money if you're a major party candidate. For us to raise that kind of money, there's no third party candidate who qualified for matching funds going back to Sonia Johnson in 1980 who probably would have qualified under this new standard. So it basically cuts out the third parties.
Right. And so we spoke earlier, and you said you kind of barely qualified, or actually, and you're still proving that you qualified. If you do prove that you qualify, roughly how much in matching funds does the Green Party expect to get back from the federal government?
I think it's between 150 and 200,000.
150.
Yeah.
150 and $200,000.
Those are the contributions that were qualified and we could document.
Right.
And we were late because it was a tough year. You know, Trump, anybody but Trump was the dominant sentiment. So we raised money for basically a year and a half and finally qualified in July 2020.
Right. And so I think it's fair to say that as currently structured, the Green Party would struggle hard to qualify under these new rules. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's a fair statement.
I wonder, before we get to the next round of matching funds, as a thought experiment, I was thinking, I wonder if the two parties here are opening themselves up to an outside challenge in a way that they haven't actually intended. Let's say that you're somebody like Oprah Winfrey or The Rock, and you have, national name recognition going into a campaign. Previously, you would have needed to be able to raise $1 billion somewhere, and unless you're a billionaire already, that's going to be difficult for you. And spending $1 billion of your own money might turn off a lot of people. But now, if you're somebody like Oprah or The Rock with this 6-to-1 matching fund, up to $250 million, I believe in public money, it seems like somebody like an Oprah, and I'm not saying it's going to be an Oprah, but some type of kind of famous person who has some type of populist appeal, who's an outsider, would now, it seems, maybe be able to compete with major parties in a way that they're not intending. Could you see that unfolding, or am I kind of overthinking it?
No, I think you're right. And in fact, in the early years of the current system, I mean, Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter wouldn't have survived 1976, except they got their matching funds in January, right before the primary started. They were broke, but they had qualified. And they also used the second part of the presidential funding, which was an equal grant to the two major parties for the fall election, which every major party candidate used until Barack Obama in 2008. McCain was the last to use it. This year, it would have been 102 million. And Biden and Trump were spending billions. So
right.
Again, one remedy might have been to raise that grant rather than make it impossible for the little guys to get access to any public money.
Right. So let's talk about the 6-to-1 match on the congressional level, because I think it's fair that to say that this would hurt Green Party candidates on the national level as it's structured now. On the congressional level, could you see a situation where a Green Party candidate would be more viable than they otherwise would? Or let me just ask you more generally, what's your take on the 6-to-1 matching funds for House and Senate candidates?
Well, I have a couple takes. First, the qualifying standard is $50,000 in small contributions.
Right.
And we've had about 550 Greens run for Congress over the last few decades we've been around. And we could only find a handful that qualified under that standard. I ran for U.S. Senate here in New York, and I looked this up today. I raised 48,000. Only about 31,000 would have qualified. And there are other reasons why, related to ballot access, why it was hard to raise money. So it'll make it difficult for third-party candidates. Again, it's like the presidential qualification. It's probably something most third-party candidates can't qualify. The other problem is the 6-to-1 match creates a 7-fold increase in the disparity. If you raise $1 million and your opponent raises $5 million, 6-to-1 match gives the smaller candidate $7 million and the big candidate $35 million. So the disparity grows from $4 million to $28 million, 7 times.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not leveling the playing field. It's still favoring the candidates that start out ahead.
To push back on that a little bit, I'm thinking about the case of Alex Morse, who kind of ran a primary challenge against Richie Neal in Western Massachusetts, and he, over the course of a couple of weeks, when he was getting national attention, I think he raised something like $500,000 plus, for a single congressional campaign from small donors, around the country. He was getting smeared by there's this homophobic smear campaign, if you remember, directed at him, and kind of in response to that, people kind of stepped up and contributed to him. And in recent cycles, we've seen that if people across the country get excited about a race, they do have the capacity to throw $50,000, $100,000, $2, $3, even $500,000 very quickly, at a cause. If people understood that a third party candidate, let's say a Green Party candidate, was going to get these 6-to-1 matching funds, and let's say they were running against a Democrat in a blue district where there wasn't a serious Republican competitor because it's such a kind of deep blue district. People were angry at the Democrat for whatever Democrat might have done in office. There's a Green that people are organizing around, and now they know that if they give, their $50, they give their $25, it's going to be matched 6-to-1. Could you see that creating a viral effect that would give the right kind of Green candidate a shot at knocking a Democrat out of Congress?
Yeah, it would have to be the right kind of Democratic candidate too.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody like Richie Neal, more centrist or conservative. Yeah, you can conceive of those scenarios in exceptional circumstances. But as a general program, I mean, why don't we have ranked choice voting?
Right.
So that the Green isn't always seen as the spoiler, which has become a bigger problem for us as the GOP becomes an extremist rule or ruin party. So progressives feel they got to vote for the centrist Democrat to stop the conservative Republican, which makes it, harder for us than ever.
My understanding is that Congress can't force states to establish ranked choice voting, though I agree that we ought to have ranked choice voting. It ought to be implemented all across the country. Do you know if I'm right about that? That is the Constitution says, I think, that states can set the time and the manner of elections, time, place, and manner of elections, and that's been understood to say that if they don't, that they can set them up however they want.
No, I think you're wrong about that. The
Okay.
Congress right now has a law that says members of Congress have to be elected from single-member districts, and that was adopted in the mid-'60s. After in the South they started electing the Congress at large, so Black folks couldn't get a representative. So they made it single-member districts. There is legislation. There's a bill called the Fair Representation Act that would require states to use ranked choice voting for districts. So, yeah, Congress can do that if it wants.
And I guess ultimately a lot of this will come down to the Supreme Court, because there is some question over whether, and they've used that precedent of the single member district to say that, well, that's why we can we can ban gerrymandering in this bill, because this is the precedent that's set before. Of course, with a Republican-dominated Supreme Court, they're not going to necessarily be bound by previous interpretations of the Constitution, as we saw with John Roberts, who said when he was nominated to the court, he said he was going to respect precedent. One of the first things he did was rule on Citizens United, which overturned basically a century of precedent, and near 50 years of campaign finance reform. So. I think you're right that they certainly could try. Like, Congress ought to at least try and kind of dare the Supreme Court to strike it down. And so, so the Green Party is not happy with the way that the national matching funds work out. I don't know how I would characterize your take on the congressional funds, either neutral to kind of leaning against. Is that fair?
I think it ought to be a lower standard. The state of Arizona has a full public campaign finance system, and you have to get a certain number of $5, I think it's $105 contributions in your assembly district to qualify. If you prorate that up to the size of congressional districts, that would be about $5,000. And since the matches are proportional to how much you raise, why not have a lower threshold so that, the Green Party and other third parties can, get into the race and be part of the conversation?
Right. That does seem fair, because it's not as if you lower the threshold to $5,000 that all of a sudden $1 million in public money goes to your campaign. You hit the $5,000 threshold, you get $5,000 back, and so I think that I think people would understand that. So let's say that you're a member of Congress, you introduce amendments to strip out the presidential funding portion that you don't like. That gets voted down. You lose on that vote. So the HR1, as it stands, goes to the floor. How would you vote at that point?
Well, in that circumstance, I vote for it because I think the voting rights are so important in the anti-gerrymandering. The Democrats just can't hand power back to the Republicans through what they're doing in the states. So, when you get to that point, you gotta check the options you have. And I think it's better that it pass, even though it's going to hurt us in terms of getting public funding. But we got bigger issues like ballot access.
Right.
Here in New York, they tripled the votes we need to stay on the ballot, the signatures we need to get back on the ballot. There was a bill introduced in Nevada last week by the Democrats to double the signature requirement. And supposedly the Democratic Socialists took over the Democratic Party in Nevada, but they were silent in the hearing. They didn't show up last week on that bill. So, just getting on the ballot is our biggest problem. And then we've always had a problem raising money and getting access to public funding. But of course, this makes it worse. But we got a lot of issues just to participate.
Are you considering running again under the Green Party banner?
I'm not even going to look at that till after the midterms. We have a New York, a big fight to get back on the ballot here. Greens are running 3 times for governor. I don't know what we're going to do this year. We're just starting to talk about it. There's just a lot of water that has to go under the bridge before we can even think about that.
Right. And this was a Cuomo-driven effort, largely, as I understand it, against his nemesis, the Working Families Party, which, his former ally, which then endorsed Cynthia Nixon. And so he freaked out on them, and he threatened to shut down the health department a year ago if the state legislature, shut down the health department in the middle of a pandemic, if the state legislature didn't pass these draconian requirements for third parties to stay on the ballot, hoping that he could stick a knife in the WFP. And you're saying so that the Greens were kind of collateral damage, you think, of that attack, or do you think he was partly coming after the Greens also?
I think it's definitely coming after us. I mean, every time he's run in the general election, he's been on the Working Families ballot line.
Right.
I got 5% of the vote running against him in 20.
Right. Even this time, after he beat Cynthia Nixon in the primary, the WFP, right, put him on their ballot.
Right. So in the general election, they don't take votes from him. Right. We took 5% in 2014. That was the year he wanted to get more than his father, Mario Cuomo, ever got. More than he got when he was first elected in 2010. He wanted to lay the groundwork for running for president. And I'm sitting there with 5% of the vote. And I think, that's what really mattered. Right. And in fact, after the November election, where both Working Families and the conservatives survived because they ran the major party candidates on their line, he said, oh, that's what we wanted to do all along. We wanted to get rid of the so-called, he called them transactional parties. We run our own candidates. We're not cutting deals with the major parties. The other argument they used was that New York's going to a matching funds public funding program, and they can't afford to fund these little third parties. But the thing is, the money doesn't go to parties, it goes to candidates. So that wasn't even an accurate argument.
What's the Green Party's experience been in New York City since New York City started adopting for some races matching funds?
We've had a few candidates qualify. It's difficult, and we had a candidate, Gloria Matera, run for borough president, and then twice against de Blasio when he was a district councilor, and she was getting double-digit up into the 20%, and had some money to get the word out. So, yeah, we were able to use that. We still prefer a full public campaign funding system like the one they have in Arizona and Maine. But we have been able to take advantage of that. So that you gotta use the system that's there, even if we prefer another one.
Right. Well, Howie Hawkins, thank you so much for joining us on the conversation.
And thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.